his belief is that your organs can all age at different rates.
His goal is to reverse his age from 45 down to a biological age of 18. So it has to be extreme, right? And these are the things that I hope anybody wanting to live a healthier lifestyle would be adopting and looking at as a starting point. Welcome to Slay, the Centre of Excellence for Women's Health, Fitness and Life. I'm your host, Louise Hazel, and today our episode dives into the fascinating topic that's captured global attention, Brian Johnson's Netflix documentary, Don't Die. If you haven't seen it already, Don't Die chronicles the life of biohacker and entrepreneur Brian Johnson as he embarks on an ambitious mission to defy aging and extend his life expectancy, not just by years, but by decades. Johnson's meticulous routines and cutting-edge technology in relentless pursuit of optimal health offers lessons for anyone looking to improve their quality of life. Let's unpack today what we learned from this incredible documentary and whether there's anything useful for you to take from it for your own life. So if you want to turn back the clock by 30 years or you're simply looking to grow gracefully, get ready to settle in because this episode is for you. Now, joining me today is my husband, Eric Strangis. And let's talk about the week because we've had a week. We're here in, it has, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're here in Los Angeles. We were under mandatory evacuation and life was pretty much turned upside down. And we're a week on. So our programming for the podcast and stuff like that is completely topsy-turvy. You know, we're backed up and we're just really figuring out how to get through life. We're really just thinking about how do we survive the week and the coming weeks ahead, because so many lives here in Los Angeles have been flipped completely and utterly upside down and on their heads. But there's one person out there that I assume it's kind of business as usual, and that's Brian Johnson. What we did manage to do during our time, during evacuation and this kind of like semi-lockdown period was watch the Don't Die documentary on Netflix.
Yeah.
And I say that to say we had questions, didn't we? We sat down as a couple to watch it. We had questions. And I know that you've got some great questions for me because I really want to think about, you know, deeply about this episode and this thing that we've seen and whether there's any real value in it and purpose for those people at home who are looking to make improvements to their everyday lives.
Yeah.
Because I know we certainly thought, you know, there's some good points to take away and some things that we could perhaps leave.
Yeah, it was a wild week, but I think having the chance to watch a little bit of TV because things were so crazy and sitting down and watching that documentary, it was something to talk about. That's for sure. It kept us busy. I mean, what were your initial impressions of Don't Die?
I can honestly say, number one, I was entertained. And I was entertained because I was like, who is this person? What is he on? It's unlike any other experiment I've ever seen because I can honestly say, like, it's an experiment. He's experimenting on himself. That's, I think, is really clear. But my initial thoughts were just like, who is this crazy dude? Like, you know, I'd heard about him through the grapevine and I know he's appeared on podcasts. Maybe we'll get him on Slay soon. But I was just like, what is this guy on? And more importantly, what possessed him to go down this route?
Yeah. Do you want to give people a little background as to like what his thing is and what he's doing and the different things that
absolutely. So Brian Johnson, he's a serial entrepreneur. He was the founder of Braintree, a company that looks after online payments. So it's a bit like PayPal. And it bought Venmo, I think, in the first 5 years for something like 26 million. So it acquired Venmo. He then went on to sell the company. And he found himself as an entrepreneur feeling, and I can relate to this, at times burnt out. He was having sleepless nights. And he was really concerned. He found himself really kind of like diving into really unhealthy habits and foods to try and kind of like remedy what the feelings that he was feeling. You know, he was also kind of struggling with his beliefs around religion, and he found himself in a really dark place. He found himself, you know, severely depressed and suffering with suicidal thoughts. And he was thinking about the mind and how the mind controls us and drives us. And I think what he was thinking is if I can control my mind, I can control my actions. And so he's taken, you know, his earnings, well-earned earnings from the sale of his company, and he's now pouring that money into the pursuit of um, agelessness or
Yeah.
defying age. He's 45. So far as we know, single, you know, living in California.
This is a good bio for his dating
I
life.
know, I'm like just giving him straight up Bumble tips.
Yeah.
Um, and he's spent $2.5 million on scientific equipment.
Hmm.
So equipment that enables him to track over 200 biomarkers every single day. He's taking, I think, in excess of 80 odd supplements
A day.
a day.
Yeah.
His food routine, he's working out for an hour a day, which I thought was actually quite reasonable given the other measures that he's taking.
Hmm.
That doesn't include the stretching at lunchtime. I think he's only having 2 meals a day. He's eating a vegan diet. And, you know, there are a number of other, let's say, interventions
Yeah.
that he's undertaking. One of them, I forget what it was penile shock therapy or something like that.
Yeah. Penile shockwave therapy. Well, it's because to compound on what, or to expand upon what you're saying, his belief is that your organs can all age at different rates.
Yes.
And so trying to take care of each of them individually so that not only can you live a long time, but that when you are, let's say, 200 years old, your
Mhm.
body still functions the way it functions when you're 25 years old.
So thinking about like mental cognition, if you think about the, you know, the number 3 causes of death,
Hmm.
cardiac disease, like heart disease, cancer,
Hmm.
and also respiratory issues,
Hmm.
and not to mention dementia, and those things are also really highly up there. So he's looking at ways in which, you know, it's inevitable, we're all going to die,
Yeah.
but looking at ways in which, I guess, is he looking at ways in which he can die gracefully or more gracefully?
No, I don't. My perception was not that he was looking for ways to die gracefully.
It
My
was more
perception
of,
is the way that he could look to live forever,
yes.
regardless. And he had I mean, he looked at everything. He's looking at hair growth. He's looking at dental hygiene. I mean, he is going through every possible intervention that you can, throw at a wall and looking at it to stick. But I mean, was there anything about his approach that you felt resonated with you as someone who's kind of in the health and fitness space?
If I had to be honest, there was too much that resonated for my liking. There was me thinking I was going to approach this documentary from like my judgy sofa and just be like, oh my God, oh my God. But there were so many things I actually thought that by the end of it, we had in common.
Mm,
And that was a real excitement over data,
mm,
and a good spreadsheet, um, a desire to want to live a healthier life.
mhm,
Um, and I think a relentless level of dedication.
mhm.
You know, his ability to show up every day, wake up at 4:30, which is literally just 30 minutes before I wake up,
Yeah.
and go to bed at 8 p.m. I often don't make it to 8 p.m.
Mhm.
So there were actually a lot of similarities where I was like looking at myself like, oh my God, am I like Louise Johnson? Like, is
Yeah.
that me? And it really made me question, like, you know, as an Olympian, we strive for the absolute optimal.
Mhm.
And so I could really understand where he's coming from in the sense of wanting to be at his very best. And he has managed to reverse his heart age.
Yeah.
He's 45, his chronological age is 45.
And that's a
Yeah.
huge measure for him that he monitors is his
Yes.
biological age.
Yeah. And, you know, his heart age is currently coming up at 37. And I think I wrote down in my notes somewhere because, I mean, I've got notes on notes on notes. I feel like he's been able to reverse his overall years. Oh, yeah. Since he started his Operation Blueprint, which is his
Mhm.
methodology, he's reversed his age by 5.1 years.
Why did you put Operation Blueprint in quotations when you said it?
Well, I don't know where that leads us to another question. You know, I think that there's some real validity to what he's doing.
Mhm.
Like I said, the things that I resonate with myself, So I am biased in that sense, wanting to live a healthier life, wanting to get to the root cause perhaps of some of the underlying conditions that I have in my own body, like
Yeah.
living with, IBS on a daily basis. 100%. I want to know on cellular level what I can do to mitigate against the inflammation in my body. Part of me knows. Part of me knows that sugar is an inflammatory, that's like literally pouring gasoline on the fire. And so the other part of me really admires his ability to shut off all emotion and just do what needs to be done. And I resonate with that from an athlete perspective.
Mm.
And I've been able to do that myself, as a high performing athlete and then as Olympian. But the person that I am today, I think has less discipline. I think because have personally shown up disciplined for so much of my life, I give myself more grace in my older age,
Mm.
perhaps in a time when I need to be more disciplined for my overall health.
Yeah. Well, you're also a very systems oriented person, and everything he does is a protocol or a system. And, I think that that's a really interesting thing to resonate with you. But do you think for the average person, there were things that, the average person could adopt?
100%. So we're talking about his protocol. He worked with a doctor called Dr. Oliver. It wasn't French. Dr. Oliver Zolman. And Dr. Oliver Zolman has devised this protocol, which basically ramps up in systems over 3 stages. So stage 1, I think, is something that we could all adopt. We don't necessarily, and like I said, he spent 2.5 million on the equipment,
Hmm.
but spends around about 2 million each year just maintaining the blood work and the daily testing and so on and so forth. His life is a human experiment. But there are a number of things, and in level 1, Zolman's longevity level 1, there are 8 things that I think that we can kind of all be doing. Number 5, I don't know what it is. But I want to list those things because I feel like these are the things that the average person at home, you guys that are listening, can really, take note of.
Mm.
And these are the things that I hope anybody wanting to live a healthier lifestyle would be adopting and
Hmm.
looking at as a starting point. So I'll go through these right now. Number 1, basically stop smoking. If you're a smoker, stop all smoking. And that can improve your lifespan up to 12 years. Number 2, good mental health can increase your lifespan an additional 10 years. So this is based on, and the metrics were taken based on the average person in the USA. So you'll be able to put 10 years on the average person in the USA. Number 3, exercise more than 6 hours per week. That'll give you another 8 years. So in that alone, you've rolled back, that's 30 years
Mm.
of lifespan on the average person. Calories, basically getting your recommended daily allowance. You want to be within 10 to 20%, i.e. 10 to 20% over or under,
Hmm.
and that'll give you another 5 years. The AHEI, don't know what that is. We'll have to find out. But that'll give you another 5 years, question
Whatever
mark.
it is.
Exactly. It's basically a diet. I imagine it's a diet protocol that he's been adopting. Number 6 is BMI. Don't know why they're using BMI. I would have
Outdated.
preferred to see a body fat percentage marker because, as we know, BMI really only is really never widely used as a predictor of your health.
Biased towards men.
Bias towards men,
Biased
bias
against people
towards
who have a lot of muscle mass.
absolutely,
Yeah.
and bias towards tall people as well.
Yep.
That'll give you another 5 years, but really it won't because it's going to be inaccurate. The interesting thing on here, number 7 was wine and wine only. So I'm assuming that, and don't quote me on this, but I'm assuming that if the only alcohol you're drinking is wine, then 40 to 125 milliliters a day, as opposed to more than that,
Mm.
will save you 2 years.
Or opposed to other types of alcohol like beer and things like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then number 8, my favorite, is sleep. And it says meet 5 criteria. So I'm assuming what he's saying there is getting an optimal amount of sleep
Hmm.
as often as you possibly can, ideally probably 365 and a quarter days a year. That'll give you another 2 years.
You know what's really interesting about this is
Not mad at those
none of
things.
those things seem very extreme, but there's a lot of controversy
Yeah,
over him as a person and the way he goes about that.
absolutely.
Why do you think that there's controversy around him? And is there a difference between his protocols and some of the more extreme measures that he
Well,
takes?
like I said, that's just level 1 protocol. He's at level 3.
Yeah.
And so, when we're looking at level 1, this is not dissimilar to the recommendations that we give our clients in the gym.
Mhm.
This is also not dissimilar to how we live our lives.
Mhm.
And in fact, I was saying to one of our clients, you're at level 2. You're at level 2 already.
Yeah.
Because one of the things on level 2, and that was looking at non-age related interventions, was building your healthcare team.
Mm.
So that means having a doctor, having a gynecologist,
Mhm.
having physiotherapists, perhaps having massage therapists. These are all the things that we have, created for our clients at Slay. And so, some of the members of our gym are already receiving a lot of access to those things just by proxy of training in our facility and the way that
Mhm.
we operate as almost like an elite training facility for elite athletes who happen to be actors or writers, directors, producers. Um, and again, so level 2 doesn't seem super like stressful. There's like looking at sexual health, non-aging conditions. So again, looking at the underlying conditions that you might have in your, whether it be genetics. So for me,
Mhm.
that would be like looking deeper into my IBS and looking for root causes. Avoiding harm is one of the ones on level 2. So that means avoiding natural disasters. So in a week like this week, Brian Johnson, for example, might have just been out. I'm out of California. I'm taking my equipment elsewhere.
Mm.
You know, um, there's also injury prevention and recovery, and I really want to go through these because I think it's really, really interesting. We've already talked about the first, and I'm gonna talk about the next 5 evidence-based medicines. So things that are, going to help you to recover. Genomics. This is something that I
Yeah,
would
he was
say is
doing gene therapy. Is that what that
gene
is?
therapy, I would say, is more on the extreme end, and more importantly, there's going to be a financial cost that
Mhm.
your average person will not be able to afford in
Yeah.
order to dive into genomics, and also some moral things there, because genomics, is super controversial because you're looking at the genes, um, and it's not necessarily always safe, and the outcomes aren't necessarily guaranteed. So, in that sense, he is playing a little bit of God.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking about, there is like a kind of a spectrum, there are these things that we hope that everybody would perhaps be looking at for themselves. And then there are certain interventions that seem like they're overkill.
Mhm.
Um, and so on and so forth. One of the simple things on level 2 is basically owning the testing equipment.
Mhm.
Again, $2.5 million in your pocket, maybe you will go out and buy an MRI machine. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but, on level 3, he really is looking at the cellular level
Mhm.
and whether that you have too few cells, too many cells, what cells are damaged, is there waste inside the cells, is there waste between the cells? Like, this is where we are really looking to really go very, very deep. And this
Mhm.
is the type of level, I think, of intervention that I would love to see widely available for people who have life-threatening
Mm.
illness.
Yeah.
So I would reserve these resources for somebody who has life-threatening illness such as cancer.
Yeah.
And how can these interventions be used for the greater good rather than one singular good?
Mhm.
And more importantly, rather than for what seemingly is a vanity project, how could we be using some of that intelligence research investment to help people recover from things that we thought were unrecoverable?
Yeah. One question that I think I had while watching the documentary is why? Why is he doing all this? And there's a suggestion that it's in the name of science
Mm.
and that it's in the name of research. Is this science?
It's scientific in the fact that he's using science to get the data, but it's not science in the fact of it being relevant or the findings of the data being relevant to anybody else apart from Brian Johnson.
Why?
because it's not a controlled study. What does that mean? That there are other participants who can also corroborate with their data that, let's say, his 35 squats a day are having a positive benefit, or his 54 supplements at breakfast time are having a positive benefit. The other side to that is there are so many interventions. How do you know which one is the one that's being beneficial? So just those two things alone basically mean, like I said, that this really is just a solo project, with the benefit of improving his life. That being said, if the wide publicity that this documentary and his wackiness is garnering has a positive impact on 1, 10, 100, 1,000, a million people to live a healthier life, then there's a part of me that's like, isn't that a really good thing?
So that's the really interesting thing that I found from the documentary is there's so much criticism about him and the way he's going about it. And it really isn't scientific in the sense that there's, like you said, so many different treatments going on at the same time. You really don't know which is the one that's having an impact positively. But there's still takeaways that you think are really useful for the average person. So let's dive into those a little bit more. So, like, in terms of his exercise, he talked a lot about emphasizing a balanced mix. Like, he's doing strength training. He's doing mobility work. He's doing flexibility work. He's doing cardiovascular training. How does that stuff align with the recommendations that you have for people in, your line of work?
Great question. Well, one of the things, if we just take strength training, for example, and then talk me through the others because I can't remember for the life of me. So the strength training, it's very clear. He has 35 exercises. He only trains for an hour. And like I said, given that the majority of his day is taking up with protocols, I'm surprised that he is smart enough to keep his workouts to an hour. Why? Because that means that he's not breaking down his body. He's still working from an anabolic place, muscle building place, a place where the body is not overly fatigued. He goes through a routine of 35 exercises. I imagine he probably changes and chops up those exercises based on the findings of the efficacy. And more importantly, it's very clear that there's a level of progressive overload, which is exactly what's required in order to build lean muscle mass, which he said was one of his goals.
What is progressive overload?
Progressive overload is basically the gradual increase in intensity of an exercise. It can be as simple as adding week on week load or, month on month load. So you go from 5-pound dumbbell curls to 30-pound dumbbell curls over a period of time that is suitable and safe for you to manage. It could also be like an increase in intensity. So perhaps your 10-minute walk at 3 miles per hour becomes a 10-minute walk at 3.5 miles per hour. So from that perspective, I didn't really have a problem with like the strength side of things. I love the fact that there's variety in his training. So he talks about strength training. There's cardiovascular training in there at various zones of training. So working on his VO2 max, I was very impressed. And also mobility in there, which I think is something that a lot of us can take for granted as we age. So you've got strength, cardiovascular conditioning, and mobility. Like, that is the epitome to me of a really balanced and beautiful programming. And so that was one of the areas where I'm like, can't argue with that. Like, for myself, that's what I'm striving in these crazy weeks that we've been having to make sure that I check those boxes. Can I get my weight workout in? Can I run today? Is my body allowing me to run today? And more importantly, one of my goals for 2025 is to get a little bit more mobility in there. So can't really fault him. He is checking all of the boxes. And so my advice for you guys at home is, if anything, find out what those 35 exercises are.
He also follows a really meticulous plant-based diet.
Yes.
How important do you think having such a specific nutrition plan is for health and performance?
Having a specific nutrition plan for health and performance, if you are If there are humongous stakes like your health, super important,
Mm.
super important. If you have a very specific goal, extremely important. The one thing I think that we are neglecting, and I say we as a society are neglecting to consider, because we're okay with turning up to the gym. Like I see more people in the gym than ever, especially at this time of year. But the one thing that I've noticed, whether it be at Slay or just out here in these streets, is a failure to have the same discipline for the gym as we have for our plates.
Mm.
And so it doesn't matter whether you are vegan, it doesn't matter whether you're vegetarian, it doesn't matter whether you're an omnivore. Being able to find a diet protocol that works for you, and by diet, I mean nutrition protocol,
Mhm.
understanding what you love to eat and what loves you back, I think is really key to being able to live a long, healthy, and healthful life.
Why is that something that doesn't get as much attention as some of the exercise?
Because it's
Because,
hard.
well, and in this documentary, that was a lot of the criticism that they showed, that a lot of pundits had, was they were suggesting that he wasn't actually living, and a lot of it had to do with how tight his nutrition plan was.
Well, if you think about how tight
Mhm.
his goal is to reverse his age from 45, his chronological age from 45, down to a biological age of 18. So it has to be extreme, right? So he's matching his nutritional protocol to his goal. Now, the average person might just have a goal of losing 5 pounds, but they might have had that goal of losing 5 pounds for the past 10 years
Mhm.
because they've failed on a daily basis to take into consideration the work that is needed to get them from A to B and adhere to it. And adherence can be really, really hard, especially if we feel like we're losing out on something. And I think that our relationship, I have to agree with one of the things that came up in the documentary, which is he was basically saying, the world in which we live in is addictive. The foods, we go drive past 12 fast food restaurants. We are locked into an algorithm every single day. There's, pornography, there's smoking, there's alcohol addiction thrown at us constantly. And yet our mind is completely overloaded with this information, and we're being asked to make good decisions for ourselves.
Mm.
And so I say that to say that if you haven't figured out by now that you are your own best doctor, then I hope that watching this documentary or hearing this podcast, I hope it really lands, because there is nobody that will take care of your body better than you will.
Obviously, you know, Brian Johnson has a very specific approach. And when we're talking about that nutrition, it's what he's eating, how much he's eating, and when he's eating it. Are some of those things more important, as important, or are they different for women?
So the protocols that Brian Johnson is having from a nutritional perspective are completely different for women. First and foremost, his calorie intake. If a woman just goes and watches the Don't Die documentary and is like, okay, he's eating 2,000 calories a day, so I'm going to eat 2,000 calories a day. First and foremost, 2,000 calories to any woman in the street could represent a calorie surplus, in which case they're going to gain weight. It could represent a calorie deficit, in which case they're going to lose weight that perhaps they don't want to lose, or it could be maintenance calories. So that, in calorific terms, is completely irrelevant. Everybody's going to have their own number. From a diet perspective, i.e. a diet type, a vegan diet might suit some people, might not suit others. Personally, for me, a person with IBS, really struggle with grains. We know that one of the biggest issues with regards to a vegan diet is the ability to get in quality dietary proteins, which is absolutely key to body fat loss. So if you're a person who has a great deal of weight to lose, i.e. fat to lose, then a vegan diet is going to make it that much harder.
Not impossible.
Not impossible. Let's not forget that also part of his protocols is taking human growth hormone and 2 types of diabetes medications. That being said, what can women take away from, his dietary practices? Uh, some of the tools that he's perhaps using. So, for example, a macronutrient tracker. Let's think about, MyFitnessPal, where you can log your food diary and track the calories in your food and the macronutrients. So, how much protein, fats, and carbohydrates you're consuming every single day. Nothing wrong with that. Um, and also, making sure that you are aware of the amount of calories you're getting every single day. Some people out there, some women out there might be not eating enough. This is often the case, especially for those people who skip breakfast, perhaps are not finding themselves hungry or eating a meal until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There's going to be some serious metabolic ramifications, especially as you get older, into your 50s, into the age of menopause. And then also, looking at the amount of dietary protein. As I said, this is absolutely key for those people who have weight to lose. And so making sure as a woman that you are getting sufficient dietary protein, not just like following perhaps a plan that he's following, making sure that that's specific to you. And for women, that's about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight or desired body weight. Making sure that you're taking note of the things that you feel are relevant to you, but applying them to a female physique. And more importantly, really look into the conversations that are being had in the media at the minute about women's fasting. We have a really great episode with Dr. Stacey Sims, who advises us that fasting for women is actually possibly one of the worst things that you can do. Fasting for men, less effect on the body, but fasting for women can be very, very detrimental to your overall metabolism.
Let's talk about mindset,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no question that there's a great deal of discipline being portrayed in that
Yeah.
documentary. He emphasizes mindfulness and stress management as part of his longevity plan of trying to live forever. How critical do you think mental health is in the pursuit of long-term physical health?
Great question. I think it goes hand in hand. I think that every elite athlete comes to a point in their journey where they understand the benefits of mental health. And it's likely not until they're fully retired, because there really isn't a time to stop and smell the roses
Mm,
when you're living in that fight or flight mode, which I think is what Brian Johnson was really alluding to in his, let's say, former life as an entrepreneur. That being said, one of the things that I found really quite sad and on a human level was that he's living his life in these extremes, constantly in these extreme places. So as an entrepreneur, not sleeping through the night, eating unhealthy foods, finding himself in a place of extreme depression, which led to suicidal thoughts, and, having, extreme religious, beliefs and religious structure as well, and throwing all of those things to the wayside. So he went from being a person who was literally lying in his room, wanting to die, to now being a person who wants to live forever. And so the extreme, I would say, flip side to that begs me to question whether his mental health is fully intact as he pursues this new project. I'm kind of thinking, is this not just a reflection, is this not just the flip side of what he's already created for himself? The beautiful thing is that, taking a person from, or he's taken himself from a place where he's been suicidal to now wanting to live, irrespective of wanting to live forever, wanting to live. That is an amazing transformation that I think that we can all take note from.
His goal is to slow or reverse aging. That's pretty clear. What is your take on the idea of defying aging versus aging gracefully?
Okay, so defying aging, as a woman who is approaching her 40s, not me, someone else, you know, I think as I age personally, I've always been kind of at peace with that. I've kind of always known that my life has been a cycle. Be an athlete has been a cycle, a life cycle. I know that inevitably There are times where I feel like I'm in fashion and I'm out of fashion. Um, I've always been okay with aging, personally. I see, though, a lot of the time of peers around me find it more uncomfortable. And like as I go into and enter my 40s, I've kind of been like, I feel less comfortable with my late 30s, and I feel more excited to get into my 40s because for me, I kind of feel like my 40s is going to be like my sexy era. So I'm kind of like, oh, I can't wait to see what I'm wearing in my 40s.
Me neither.
I feel like I feel like, okay, Eric, I feel like I'm a grown ass woman, and there's a certain like, a certain confidence that is like naturally building in me, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to change. Um, I hope it doesn't change, and we've talked about aging, and you always ask me whether I've had Botox, and the answer is not today. And I don't dabble, and I have tried, under eye filler once, and that was bizarre. And the Botox did not go down well at all. It really made my face look crazy. And so I'm kind of really resigned, me personally, myself, to just growing old gracefully. And when I look at my friends who perhaps are not having all of the facial interventions and injections in the world, and I can see like when they're actually smiling at me, I can tell that they're smiling with their eyes, and their eyes crease up and I see the lines, or they're frowning and I can see the lines and I can see all of the facial expressions. There's something really freaking beautiful in that. And I want to know, I want people to know that when I am cracking up laughing, that they can see everything, and the face, and my hands are effectively just like this map of my life and where I've been and what I've done. I don't want to erase that.
So many of the tools and technologies and things that Johnson is applying in this effort to biohack his life are quite expensive.
Yeah,
And
I imagine penile shockwave therapy is quite punchy.
I could imagine that's probably the case myself. Not that I've Googled it or researched it or ever even
Do they do
considered
like,
it.
packages?
No, let's not keep going down that route. But for someone who, didn't want to break the bank, I think you're someone who's extremely resourceful. How can the average person adopt some of these principles without breaking the bank?
Yo, easy. Sleep, number one, it's free. It is free. You can sleep anywhere. You can sleep on the train. You can sleep on the bus. Don't fall asleep in your cars unless you're parked and you're, parked and pulled aside and in neutral and those wheels are turned towards the curb and all that good stuff. No, or do you turn away from the curb? You turn away from the curb.
All right.
Okay,
this
just
is another
checking.
conversation for
Sleep
the podcast.
is free. Get it while you can. For all those of you who aren't yet mothers, get it while you can. Sleep's the one for me. Nutrition. Like, if you can afford to go out to eat multiple times a week, then you can afford to eat whole foods. What do we mean by whole foods? Foods that are straight from the earth, like not tinned, like fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, fresh proteins, meat, red meats, poultry, etc., eggs, all of the good things. Your diet should consist of a whole food diet. Focus on those fruit and vegetables. That's where you're going to get your micronutrients, and vitamins from. These are the things that are going to nourish your body. The more nutrients in the body, the more full you're going to feel. Sometimes we have this mistake of thinking that we're still hungry, when actually our body's sometimes just crying out for nutrients. And so bear that in mind. If you're going to invest your money anywhere from a nutrition perspective, invest in protein, because that's also what's going to keep you fuller for longer. So you're no longer going to be in that place where you're craving, copious amounts of sweet food or savory food in the evening, and you end up buying chips or cakes or whatever it be. And also that things are going to be long-term really bad for your health. Sleep, nutrition, and exercise. You don't have to have a personal trainer to be able to go out and walk. Walking's free. You know what I mean? Walk these streets, walk those hills, utilize what you have in your immediate neighborhood. Utilize the space that you have at home. It might be that you invest in a set of dumbbells, but there are workouts out there that are freer on YouTube. And think about how you can turn something that is super sustainable to you into something that becomes progressive. So if your normal routine is to like walk around the block once, how can you walk around the block next week better? Can you walk around the block faster? Can you walk around the block and maybe like skip or jog some of the way? Like think about the ways in which you can constantly amp up your next physical activity.
Hmm. What unique insights or strategies from Don't Die do you think are particularly relevant for women
Mm.
looking to optimize their health and well-being?
Honestly, the thing that I really took home from the documentary was his level of self-care. So it's very clear that Brian Johnson is now in this phase of his body where he is dedicated to looking after himself, his mental state, his physical state, you know, and he might be doing it all together in a holistic way quite extremely. But if you can even get 25% of the level of self-care that this man does on a daily basis, do you know what I mean? Like the tongue scraping, the mouthwash, the taking time to really focus on your body. But more importantly, if there's one thing that I say to women is one thing that Brian Johnson does better than all of us is he thinks about himself first thing in the morning.
Mm.
Before he goes and, perhaps calls his son or, chats to his family, I'm assuming he takes care of himself first. And that I think is something that we can all probably take a little note from because as we all know, I was ill just a couple of weeks ago. Like, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. And so that would be the one thing that I would say to women that we have a habit of doing is literally getting up and making sure the kids are taken care of or the boyfriend or the husband or whatever and getting straight to work and getting straight to it. I think if there's one thing to take away, it's really building a routine of self-care around building that out first and then layering the other things that are important to your life on top of it.
Yes, I think that's a really great point.
Okay, so Don't Die is more than a documentary. It is a wake-up call to take control of your health and your future. Brian Johnson's journey reminds us all that longevity isn't about living forever. It's about living well with energy, purpose, and vitality. And as women, we have a unique health challenges and opportunities. But by embracing the principles of biohacking, we can optimize our bodies and our minds to live our fullest lives yet. That concludes this episode of Slay. Stay tuned for more empowering discussions on female health, fitness, and life. You can follow me at Louise Hazel on social media, and you can follow Eric at Eric Strangis now. And you can check out the Slay brand at Slay Athletic Club. And don't forget to subscribe to the Slay podcast if you haven't done so already on YouTube and leave us a comment. Let me know what you thought of this episode and if you've seen the documentary already. You can also get fit at home using the Slay app. You can download that now for free from the App Store to join our online community.